Hey, coffee lovers. Before we dive into Marcus and Riley's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And rate on a scale of 1-10. Let's go. The espresso machine hissed like it had something personal against the world. Riley O'Connor didn't look up from the portafilter she was tamping with the precision of a surgeon, her jaw set in that particular way it got when the steamer was acting up again. 7:53 in the morning. 17 minutes until the breakfast rush would transform the Grounded, her small, stubbornly independent coffee shop in the East Village, into controlled chaos. She'd owned this place for 4 years. 4 years of 6:30 a.m. wake-ups, of learning which roasters actually cared about their beans, of arguing with landlords, of surviving a pandemic that nearly bankrupted her twice over. 4 years of building something that belonged entirely to her. The steam wand gurgled. Riley exhaled slowly through her nose. "You're going to break it if you keep glaring at it like that." Riley looked up to find Marcus Sterling standing in her doorway, leather jacket still on, despite the early September warmth creeping through the windows. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, the kind of disheveled that probably required a $100 haircut to maintain. And he was holding his motorcycle helmet under one arm like it was a football trophy. She'd seen him exactly 17 times over the past 3 weeks. She'd counted. "Good morning to you too," Riley said, turning back to her machine. "The usual? Please." He moved to the counter with an easy confidence that reminded her why she'd immediately disliked him. Rich people always moved like they owned the space they were in, even when they didn't. "Though I have to ask, what exactly is the usual? Because I've ordered it 17 times, and you've made it differently each time." Okay, so he'd counted too. Riley felt her cheeks warm slightly, and she hated it. She was 35 years old. She did not blush. It's called experimenting with grind consistency and water temperature. It's called having standards. It's called being impossible to please, Marcus said, but there was a smile in his voice. He set the helmet down on the corner of the counter. She'd asked him a dozen times not to do that, and pulled out his phone. "This morning, for instance. I can already tell by the way you're attacking that portafilter that we're in for something bold. Probably a lighter roast than yesterday. You're punishing the machine for something." Riley's hands stilled. She turned to face him fully, one eyebrow raised. "Punishing the machine? The machine did something to upset you. Now you're showing it who's boss." He was scrolling through something on his phone, not even looking at her, but she could see the corner of his mouth twitching. "Am I right?" "The machine is fine," Riley said, which was a lie. The machine was a temperamental nightmare that she'd inherited from the previous owner and couldn't afford to replace. "You're reading into things? I've had 17 coffees here, Riley. I'm basically an expert on your tells." There it was again, that casual familiarity that should have bothered her more than it did. The way he said her name, like they were already friends, like he hadn't just shown up out of nowhere 3 weeks ago, looking like he'd lost a fight with a closet full of designer labels. She turned back to the espresso machine, her movements deliberate and slightly aggressive. "You know what your problem is, Sterling? I'm sure you're about to tell me. You think you can read people. You think after a few conversations you understand how everyone works." She began pulling the shot, watching the dark liquid stream into the small white cup. "But you don't. You're just doing that thing rich people do where you mistake observation for insight." There was a pause. Riley kept her eyes on the espresso, but she could feel him watching her. "Is that what I'm doing?" he asked quietly. Something in his tone made her look up. His phone was down now. His expression had shifted into something more serious, and she realized with a start that she'd actually managed to get under his skin. The thought gave her a small, petty sense of satisfaction. "Probably," she said, but less certainly now. "For the record," Marcus said, "I don't think I understand how you work. If anything, you're more confusing now than you were 3 weeks ago." He picked up the helmet again, set it back down. "On day 1, you told me my coffee order was optimized for someone who's never actually tasted real coffee. Then you spent 20 minutes explaining the difference between Kenyan and Ethiopian beans, like I was a particularly slow golden retriever. Despite herself, Riley smiled. She'd done that. Yesterday, he continued, you made me a coffee that was so good, I actually sat down for 15 minutes instead of taking it on the bike. You didn't comment on it, but I saw you watching from behind the counter to see if I'd finish it. I was watching to see if you'd pay for it, Riley said, but they both knew that was a lie too. The espresso was ready. She added the steamed milk with the same care she applied to everything in this shop. Not too much foam, not too little, the temperature perfect, the pour executed with the kind of precision that came from doing something you actually gave a damn about. She slid the cup across the counter. This one's different, she said. Single origin from Rwanda, light roast. I'm trying something new with the steam ratio. Marcus picked up the cup, their fingers nearly touching for a half-second across the ceramic rim. He brought it to his lips without looking away from her, and Riley felt her stomach do something completely unreasonable. He took a long sip, closed his eyes. Jesus, he said softly, then opening his eyes. That's perfect. Riley looked away first. It's coffee. It's not just coffee. He took another sip. You can taste the care in it, the intention. Stop it, she thought fiercely. Stop being charming. Stop saying things like that. Stop. That'll be $5, she said, turning to ring it up. I already paid you for this coffee. That was for the regular. This is a special order. It's the same cup, different contents. She could hear the smile in his voice again when he spoke. So we're charging for emotional labor now? Because if so, I think I've owed you money for weeks. Riley turned back, incredulous. Emotional labor? What emotional labor have you provided? I've listened to you complain about your landlord, the city council, your supplier in Brooklyn, who's apparently personally attacking your business, and your mother's opinions on why you should have taken over your father's restaurant instead of starting from scratch. He was counting on his fingers. That's definitely emotional labor. You asked about those things, Riley said, but she was fighting a smile now. I didn't force you to hear my life story. True. He drained the rest of the coffee in one long swallow, then set the cup down with theatrical satisfaction. But I'm going to keep asking, because it turns out that listening to you complain is significantly more interesting than anything happening in my inbox right now. Riley's chest did something complicated. She focused on clearing the cup from the counter, on wiping down the already clean espresso machine, on literally anything other than the fact that Marcus Sterling had just said something that felt dangerously close to sincere. You have somewhere to be, she said finally. You're always somewhere else by 8. Board meeting in Midtown. He slid off the stool and picked up his helmet. But I meant what I said. The coffee was perfect. You're perfect at this. He was moving toward the door before she could respond, and Riley realized she'd forgotten to tell him her usual witty deflection, her practiced dismissal. By the time her brain caught up, he was already stepping out into the early morning, motorcycle helmet already in place, leather jacket catching the first real light of the day. She watched him through the window, watched him throw his leg over the vintage Harley-Davidson that looked like it cost more than her entire inventory, watched him adjust his mirrors with the kind of care most people reserved for important things, watched him pull out into the East Village morning traffic with the kind of confidence that suggested he'd never once considered the possibility of an incident. Then he was gone. Riley stood alone in her coffee shop, holding an empty cup, her heart doing things it had absolutely no business doing, and realized with a mix of dread and something that might have been hope that Marcus Sterling would probably be back tomorrow morning. She would be here. Of course she would be here. She owned this place. Marcus Sterling's office on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Technologies building in Midtown Manhattan had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked most of the city. On a clear day, you could see all the way to the Statue of Liberty. He never looked at the view anymore. Instead, he stared at the email on his screen, The same one he'd been staring at for the past 2 hours, the words blurring together into a kind of corporate alphabet soup that all meant the same thing. Come back. We need you. Your father is getting older. Stop playing around. His father had used different words, of course. His father was better at diplomacy than guilt, even if he wasn't particularly good at it. The email had arrived at 6 in the morning, which meant David Sterling had probably drafted it at 5:59, the moment he'd decided that Marcus's extended sabbatical in New York had gone on long enough. The California operations are suffering without direct leadership, the email read. Your mother misses you. The board has questions about your commitment to the company. We need to discuss your future at Sterling Technologies. Marcus had read it 14 times. Each time his stomach had clenched a little tighter. He'd left Silicon Valley 8 months ago because he was burning out. That was the diplomatic version. The real version was that he'd had a panic attack during a board meeting, walked out, gotten on a motorcycle he'd bought on impulse, and driven across the country without a plan. He'd ended up in New York because his college roommate lived here, and he'd stayed because the city was big enough that nobody seemed to care that he existed. Nobody except Riley. The thought pulled him back to the present moment, and Marcus realized he'd been staring at the same sentence for 3 minutes without actually reading it. He closed the email without responding. His father hated when he did that, but his father hated most things Marcus did these days anyway. A knock on the door made him look up. His assistant, Jennifer, poked her head in with the particular expression of someone about to deliver news that would make his day worse. Your mother's online too, Jennifer said apologetically. She's been trying to reach you since yesterday. She says it's important. Of course she had. His mother moved through the world like a chess player, always 3 moves ahead, always executing strategies she'd planned weeks in advance. If his father sent the email, his mother would call. That was how it worked. Marcus picked up the phone. Hi, Mom. Don't hi, Mom me, Catherine Sterling said by way of greeting. Her voice had the particular edge it got when she was disappointed, but trying to be diplomatic about it. Your father sent you an email. I know, I got it. And I'm still thinking about it. Thinking about it. He could practically hear her sitting down at her desk, the sound of her expensive pen clicking against the marble surface. Marcus, there's nothing to think about. You're needed here. Your father's health isn't what it was, and the board is starting to ask uncomfortable questions about succession planning. This was news. His father hadn't mentioned his health in the email, which meant either Catherine was exaggerating or his father was hiding something. Marcus tried not to think about which scenario was more likely. Is he okay? Marcus asked. He's fine, but he's not young anymore. We all have to think about the future. His mother paused, and he could picture her perfectly, sitting in her home office in Palo Alto, surrounded by the kind of tasteful minimalism that cost more than most people's houses. When are you coming back, sweetheart? There it was. The real question underneath all the business talk and health concerns. When was he coming back to the life he'd left behind? When was he going to stop this New York experiment and return to being the dutiful heir? I don't know yet, Marcus said carefully. You don't know. His mother's voice shifted into something colder. Marcus, you've been in New York for 8 months. You have a trust fund and a motorcycle. You're not actually exploring yourself. You're hiding. The words hit harder than he wanted to admit. I'm not hiding. Then what are you doing? Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you're running away from your responsibilities. Marcus closed his eyes. Through the window, he could see the East Village in the distance. Too far away to make out individual buildings, but he knew exactly where the grounded was. He knew the route from here to there. He could drive it blindfolded. I needed a break, he said quietly. A break is 2 weeks. A break is a sabbatical. 8 months is an identity crisis. And frankly, honey, you're not paying for it alone. Your father is paying for it. Your family is paying for it. We need you to make a decision. What decision? You've already decided I should come back. You'd either come back and commit to the company or stay in New York and commit to something else. But you can't sit in the middle forever, Marcus. That's not fair to any of us." His mother's voice softened slightly. "I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be realistic. You can't hide in a city forever." After they hung up, with no resolution, because there never was one with his mother, Marcus sat in his office as the morning light shifted across the desk. He had 3 meetings scheduled. He had emails to answer. He had a company that, despite his extended absence, continued to run itself without him. He also had a coffee shop he wanted to see. At 10:30, Marcus did something he almost never did. He cancelled his afternoon meetings. His assistant's eyebrows rose when he told her, but she didn't question it. That was one of the benefits of being the heir. People assumed you had a good reason for your choices, even when you didn't. The ride from Midtown to the East Village took 20 minutes if you caught the lights right. Marcus didn't. He took his time, letting the bike carry him through the city, feeling the October air start to bite through his jacket as summer finally released its grip on New York. The Grounded was relatively quiet when he arrived. 11:15, that odd gap between the breakfast rush and the lunch crowd. Riley was behind the counter, restocking cups, and she looked up with the particular expression of someone who was not expecting company. "You have a meeting," she said by way of greeting. "I remember this because you were very specific about how you had to be back in Midtown by 9 yesterday. I cancelled it." She set down the stack of cups and crossed her arms. "Why would you do that?" Marcus realized he didn't have a good answer. The truth was too complicated and probably too honest. Instead, he said, "Coffee? Of course coffee. You don't show up to a coffee shop for conversation." But she was already moving toward the espresso machine, and there was something in her expression that suggested she was not entirely unhappy about his sudden appearance. "Actually," Marcus said, hoisting himself onto one of the stools at the counter, "today I'm thinking maybe I show up for conversation." Riley raised an eyebrow. Must have been some cancelled meeting. "Family stuff," he said before he could stop himself. Then, because he'd already opened that door, "My parents think I'm wasting my life." The espresso machine started its familiar hiss. Riley didn't respond immediately, and Marcus watched her work, the precise movements, the way her whole body seemed to engage with the process. She made coffee like some people made love, with intention, with presence, with the kind of care that suggested the outcome mattered. "Are you?" she asked finally. "Wasting your life? I don't think so. But I'm not sure that my opinion is the one that matters right now." Riley finished the espresso, added the milk with her usual precision, and slid the cup across the counter. This morning's special, probably. Something she'd thought up while closing last night, something that existed nowhere else in the world. "My father wanted me to take over his restaurant," she said. She wasn't looking at him, focusing on wiping down the steamer. "Had it all planned out. I was supposed to work my way up from busser to manager to owner, his owner, follow the path he'd built. What happened? I opened a coffee shop instead." She finally looked at him. "And he didn't speak to me for 2 years. Marcus felt something in his chest shift. "How long ago was that?" 11 years. She set down the cloth. "He came in here about 3 months after it happened, didn't tell me he was coming. Just showed up one morning, looked around, tried the coffee, and cried into his espresso like a crazy person." "What made him change his mind?" "He said—" Riley paused, remembering something. He said he realized he'd been so busy worrying about me following his dream that he'd never asked what mine actually was. He said the coffee was so good because I actually wanted to make it, that he'd never made food like that because he was too busy resenting my mother for not becoming the chef instead of him, and he'd projected it all onto me." She shrugged, but there was something bittersweet in the gesture. "People are complicated, parents especially. They want you to be happy, but they also want you to be happy in the way they understand." Marcus stared into his coffee. "And if what makes you happy isn't what they understand?" Then I guess you have to decide what matters more, their understanding or your own happiness. She said it so simply, as if it were obvious, as if years of family drama could be resolved through a single conversation over espresso, as if the weight of expectation and obligation and genetic destiny could be dismissed with a shrug and a good cup of coffee. "That's easier said than done," Marcus said quietly. "Probably." Riley moved down the counter to organize some cups that were already organized, but worth thinking about at least. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, him drinking coffee, her moving around the shop with the kind of productive efficiency that suggested she had things to do but wasn't in a particular hurry to do them. Around 11:45, the lunch crowd started trickling in, and Riley's attention shifted to the business of running her shop. But before Marcus left, and he eventually had to leave because he wasn't actually that much of a rebel against his own life, Riley called out to him. "For what it's worth," she said, "I don't think you're wasting your life." Someone who was wasting it wouldn't care this much about what his parents thought. After he'd gone, Marcus drove his motorcycle in no particular direction, eventually ending up in Washington Square Park, where he sat on a bench and watched the city move around him. His phone had buzzed approximately 17 times, Jennifer trying to reach him about the cancelled meetings, his father's secretary requesting a call back, an email from the board chair with the subject line, "Urgent, quarterly report." He didn't look at any of them. Instead, he thought about Riley's father, showing up to a coffee shop his daughter had created, realizing he'd been wrong about what happiness looked like. He thought about his own father, probably sitting in an office not that different from Marcus's own, wondering where his son had gone and when he was coming back. He thought about what Riley had said. You have to decide what matters more. By evening, Marcus had made a decision, not a big one, not the kind of decision that would change everything, just a small one. He texted his father, "Can we schedule a real conversation? Not about the business, about what I'm doing here and why. I think we should actually talk." His father's response came back almost immediately. "Of course. When?" Marcus looked at the time. It was 7 in the evening in New York, which meant 4 o'clock in California. His father would still be at the office. He probably hadn't stopped working, hadn't gone home to his mother, hadn't taken a break since reading the morning emails. "Not tonight," Marcus wrote. "This weekend. In person. I'm coming to California." There was a longer pause before the response. "Okay, we'll figure it out." "I'm glad you're coming home." Marcus stared at that word, home. California had been his home for the past 10 years. Silicon Valley, the company headquarters, his apartment overlooking the valley, his entire adult life. All of it was there. But sitting on a bench in Washington Square Park, 3,000 miles from his family's expectations, Marcus wasn't entirely sure that was still true. The Sterling Technologies headquarters in Silicon Valley looked exactly the way Marcus remembered it. All clean lines, minimalist design, and the kind of calculated aesthetic that screamed, "We have more money than taste." Glass and steel and endless open concept offices where thousands of people worked at standing desks, collaborating on innovation that would probably change the world or at least make the company richer. He'd never been entirely sure which one was the point. His father was waiting for him in the executive suite on the top floor, the one with the actual view of the valley and the kind of office that still had a door. A luxury in a company that preached radical transparency. David Sterling looked older than Marcus remembered. Not dramatically so, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, the way he moved around his desk, that suggested the past 8 months had aged him in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. His mother had mentioned his health, but Marcus had assumed it was exaggeration. Mothers exaggerated about their husbands the way husbands exaggerated about their golf games. It was just something they did. Looking at his father now, Marcus wasn't sure about that. "You look good," his father said by way of greeting. "The motorcycle suits you. You look happy." "I look like I haven't slept in 36 hours, Marcus said, which was technically true. He'd gotten on a red-eye from New York, rented a car at the airport, and driven directly to the office because his father had a meeting at 3 and wanted to see him before then. But I appreciate the sentiment. David smiled, a real smile, not the corporate version he deployed for board meetings. Fair enough, come sit. They settled into the uncomfortable modern chairs that his father had paid approximately $80,000 for, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus looked around the office, noting the things he'd forgotten. The photo of his mother on the desk, the framed article about his father in Forbes, the stack of unread books on artificial intelligence that had been sitting in the same corner for 5 years. "Your mother told you she called," David said finally. "She did. She made it sound like the business was falling apart without me." "It's not." His father leaned back in his chair. "But it's not thriving the way it could be either. We're missing leadership at the California level. The team is competent, but they're not making decisions the way I would, the way I'd want them to, the way you'd want them to," Marcus repeated. "Not the way they think is best?" His father raised an eyebrow. "Is there a difference?" "Probably. That seems like the whole problem, actually." David set down his coffee, probably his 10th of the day, knowing his father. "Your mother thinks you've had some kind of awakening in New York, that you've found yourself or some such thing. I thought maybe you'd just had a breakdown and needed time to recover, but listening to you talk," he paused, "I'm starting to think maybe the situation is more complicated than either of us realized." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He'd come to California expecting a fight, a battle between his father's expectations and his own fragile sense of self. Instead, his father sounded almost curious, as if Marcus were a problem he was trying to understand rather than solve. "I don't know if I've found myself," Marcus said carefully, "but I know I was dying in California. I was dying slowly, and I didn't even realize it was happening until I was already gone." Dying how? Everything was measured. Success was quantifiable. The metrics mattered more than the actual work. I was optimizing for things that didn't mean anything, and I didn't even notice because everyone around me was doing the same thing. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "I'd wake up and check my email before my eyes were fully open. I'd go to bed thinking about quarterly projections. I had money and power and absolutely no idea what any of it was for." His father listened without interrupting, which was unusual. David Sterling was a man who believed in brevity, in moving conversations toward conclusions, in solutions rather than explorations. "Then what happened in New York?" he asked finally. Marcus thought about the grounded, about Riley making coffee with the kind of focus most people reserved for surgery, about the way she looked when she was explaining the difference between a pour-over and a French press, like the distinction actually mattered. "I found something that was real," Marcus said. "I found someone who made something they actually cared about. I drank approximately 17 cups of terrible coffee before I realized what I was actually doing there." "And what were you actually doing there?" "Wasting time, or not wasting time. I'm still figuring out which." Marcus met his father's eyes. "But I know that whatever I'm doing, I don't want to do it in California. I don't want to run Sterling Technologies, Dad. I've been telling myself for years that I did, that it was my responsibility, that you'd be disappointed if I didn't. But you're going to be disappointed either way, aren't you? Might as well disappoint you by doing something I actually want to do." His father didn't respond immediately. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the valley that had defined his entire adult life. In the distance, Marcus could see the Tesla factory, the Google campus, all the monuments to innovation and ambition that had made this place into what it was. "I was your age when I started Sterling Technologies," David said finally. "I had just as much passion as you do right now. I was going to change the world. I was going to prove something." He turned back to face Marcus. "What I actually did was spend 35 years optimizing for success, like you said. I forgot why I started this in the first place. I just kept building, kept achieving, kept trying to stay ahead of the competition. He sat back down. Your mother gave me an ultimatum 5 years ago. She said either I start enjoying my life, or she was going to enjoy it without me. So I started delegating, started taking weekends off, started trying to remember what I actually liked to do. He smiled ruefully. Turns out I like to work. I just don't like to do it for the wrong reasons. So you understand, Marcus said. You get why I can't come back. I understand that you need to figure out what you want before you commit to anything. David steepled his fingers. But I don't understand why that has to happen in New York, why it can't happen here, where your family is, where you have support. Because here, everything is tied to the company. Everything is about success and failure and making the right moves. I can't think about what I actually want when I'm surrounded by people who already think they know what's best for me. His father nodded slowly, as if this made sense to him in a way Marcus hadn't expected. Okay, so what's the plan? You stay in New York indefinitely? I don't know. Maybe. I'm thinking about it. Marcus hesitated. There's someone there. Or maybe not someone yet. We're still figuring it out. Riley, his father said. Marcus's head snapped up. How do you... You've mentioned her approximately 4 times in the last 10 minutes, and you got this particular look on your face each time. His father smiled. The same look your mother got when she first met me, like she'd found something valuable and wasn't quite sure how to keep it from breaking. It's not like that. We've known each other for 3 weeks. Then you've got plenty of time to figure it out. His father stood up, signaling that the conversation was reaching its natural conclusion. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to let the board know that you're taking a personal leave of absence. Could be 3 months, could be a year. We're going to hire someone to run the California operations, someone who actually wants the job, and you're going to go back to New York and figure out what you want. Just like that? Marcus couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. No guilt, no pressure, no speeches about family legacy. Oh, there will be guilt, his father said. But it's my guilt, not yours. You shouldn't have to carry that weight, he paused. When I'm your age, I want to be able to look back and know I made my own choices. I want that for you too, even if those choices aren't what I would have chosen. They didn't embrace. The Sterlings weren't really an embracing family, but his father did grip Marcus's shoulder for a moment, and that was something. It was acknowledgement. It was permission. It was his father finally stepping back. Marcus flew back to New York that evening, his mind spinning with the conversation, with the unexpected gift of autonomy his father had given him. He'd expected a fight. He'd got an understanding instead, which somehow felt more complicated. He had 2 days before he was supposed to see Riley at the Grounded again, his usual Wednesday morning visit. The thought of waiting 2 days felt impossible, so on his first morning back in the city, he showed up at 6:45. The shop was closed, but there was a light on in the back, and when Marcus knocked, Riley emerged from the storage room, looking distinctly annoyed. "We're not open," she called through the glass door. "I know, but you're here." She unlocked the door and pulled it open. "It's 6:45 in the morning, Sterling, on a day when you're supposed to be at a board meeting in Midtown. I was in California, got back last night." He stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of coffee and pastry. "I need to talk to you." Riley took a step back, and Marcus realized she looked tired. Her hair was in a messy bun, and she was wearing an old Yale hoodie that was falling off one shoulder. She looked real in a way that Marcus suddenly understood was completely terrifying to her. "Okay," she said slowly, "but I'm making coffee first, because this conversation has the energy of something that requires caffeine." She moved around the shop with practiced efficiency, pulling out beans, starting up the machine, going through the familiar ritual. Marcus sat at his usual stool and tried to figure out how to say what he needed to say. "My family thought I was wasting my time," he started. "My parents especially. They thought this New York thing was some kind of breakdown, and I should get back to my real life." "Ah, and what did you tell them?" Riley asked, not looking at him, focusing on the pour-over she was preparing. "I told them no." He paused. "Not no to them, exactly. No to going back to California, no to running the family company, no to the life that was already planned out for me. Riley set down the coffee pitcher carefully. That's a big no. It is, but it's the right one. He watched her finish the pour-over, watched her work, watched her hands shake slightly as she did. My dad asked me why I couldn't figure out what I wanted in California, why it had to be New York, and I realized I couldn't explain it because I still wasn't entirely sure myself. He stood up and moved around the counter before she could stop him. But I think I know now. Riley took a step back, and there was something in her expression that looked like fear. Marcus, don't. Don't what? Don't do that thing where you show up looking all sincere and vulnerable and say something that makes me feel like this could be something real. Because it can't. You're going through something. You're figuring yourself out. And I'm here, and I'm real, and I'm available, so you think— I think nothing, Marcus interrupted quietly. I think that 3 weeks ago I was drowning in a life that didn't belong to me. And then I found a coffee shop in the East Village. And I found you. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could breathe. That's called a break from reality, Riley said. That's called escapism. Maybe, but I went back to California yesterday. I had a real conversation with my father. I made a real decision about my future. And the entire time, the only thing I could think about was whether that decision was going to let me stay in New York. With you. Riley turned away, busying herself with cleaning the already clean espresso machine. You barely know me. I know you make coffee like it matters. I know you argue with your suppliers and care about your customers and have this whole thing about your father taking 2 years to accept your choices. And you're probably terrified I'm going to do the same thing. Marcus moved closer. I know that you blush when you're caught watching me and that you pretend to be tougher than you actually are. I know that you're scared. Of course I'm scared, Riley said, her voice cracking slightly. I'm scared because you're rich and privileged and you can afford to play around with your identity. But I can't. I've built something real here, and I'm not going to risk it for some guy who might decide in 6 months that he's figured himself out and needs to move on to the next experience. Marcus reached out and gently turned her to face him. What if I don't move on? Then you'll be the first person in my life who actually stayed, Riley said quietly. And that's terrifying too. I know, Marcus said. He didn't touch her, didn't push, just stood there in the space between them. For what it's worth, I'm terrified too. I've never done this before. I've never actually had to choose my own life. I've always just lived the one that was given to me. Riley looked up at him, and he could see her weighing something, calculating the risk. If you leave, she said finally, I'm not going to wait around. Okay, and if this is just a phase, it's not. You don't know that. I do, Marcus said. Because I talked to my father yesterday and told him I'm taking a leave of absence from the company. I told him I don't know what I want to do with my life yet, but I know I want to figure it out here, in New York, somewhere near you. Riley's eyes widened. You did what? I made a choice. For real. Not a temporary one. Not something I can walk back when things get hard. He stepped closer. I'm staying, Riley. That's the decision, not because I'm running away anymore, but because I'm running toward something. I just need to know if you're willing to let me figure out what that something is. For a long moment, Riley didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her expression shifting between hope and terror and something that looked like hunger. The hunger of someone who wanted to believe in something but wasn't entirely sure how. Then she reached up, grabbed his jacket, and kissed him. It was not gentle. It was desperate and angry and hopeful all at once, the kind of kiss that came from someone who'd been holding something back for a very long time. Marcus kissed her back, tasting coffee and fear and the beginning of something he was terrified and thrilled about in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, Riley was breathing hard, her forehead still pressed against his. This is crazy, she said. Absolutely insane, Marcus agreed. You're probably going to break my heart. I'm going to try very hard not to. And if you do, then you'll kick me out of this coffee shop and probably throw a mug at me, and I'll deserve it." Riley pulled back enough to look at him. "You've really thought about this." "I've really thought about you," Marcus corrected. "I've thought about you making coffee at 6 in the morning. I've thought about you arguing with your landlord. I've thought about you telling me stories about your father and looking at me like you actually wanted me to understand. And I decided that whatever happens next, I want it to happen while I'm still here, while I'm still in your life." "Okay," Riley said softly. "Okay, okay. Stay. Figure out your life. But you're making that pour over yourself because you're the only person I know who makes it worse than I do, and I'm curious if you can actually learn." She smiled despite herself. "Also, you should know that I'm not an easy person to be in a relationship with. I work too much. I worry constantly. I probably won't let you anywhere near my business finances." "That's okay," Marcus said. "I'm not an easy person either. I'm figuring out who I am. I'll probably mess things up." "Definitely," Riley agreed, "but at least you're being honest about it." They made coffee together in the early morning light, Marcus attempting the pour-over, while Riley watched with an expression somewhere between amusement and concern. He managed not to completely ruin it, which she seemed to consider a victory. They drank it sitting at the counter, her shoulder occasionally brushing against his, and neither of them tried to pretend that everything had changed. Because it had. And they both knew it. 3 weeks into being in a relationship with Riley O'Connor, Marcus Sterling had learned approximately 17 things about love that no business school had ever taught him. The first thing was that love was not optimization. You could not measure it in metrics. You could not create a 5-year plan for it or develop a strategic roadmap for its success. Love was messy and inconvenient, and sometimes it required you to show up at 6 in the morning to help close down a coffee shop because Riley's assistant had called in sick and she was drowning. The second thing was that love meant learning her coffee orders for the repeat customers. There was Derek, who always came in at 7:15 and liked his cappuccino with an extra shot and exactly 1 sugar. There was Margaret, who was 73 and ordered a cortado every morning and had been doing so for the past 4 years. There was James, who was working on his novel in the corner booth and ordered an Americano that Riley always made slightly stronger than anyone else's because she said he needed the extra caffeine for his creativity. The third thing was that love meant listening to her rant about her suppliers at midnight when she couldn't sleep, because she'd discovered her coffee roaster in Brooklyn was sourcing beans from a company with questionable labor practices. It meant sitting with her while she researched alternative suppliers, calling at 9 in the morning to track down someone who could get her decent Ethiopian beans without the ethical compromises. The fourth thing, and this one had surprised Marcus, was that love meant being completely, utterly terrified sometimes. "I can't do this anymore," Riley said, throwing down her apron with more force than necessary on a Thursday morning in late October. Marcus looked up from the customer he was helping, a Tuesday regular who'd become a Thursday regular because Riley had let Marcus take over some of the shifts, and felt his stomach clench. "Do what?" he asked carefully. "This." Riley gestured vaguely at the coffee shop, at herself, at the space between them. "All of it. I can't keep splitting my attention between running a business and whatever this is we're doing. Something has to give, and I'm tired of it being my coffee." The regular, a woman named Sarah who worked in publishing, looked deeply uncomfortable and suddenly became very interested in her phone. Marcus told her to take her time, that the coffee was on the house, and moved toward Riley, who was furiously reorganizing already organized cups in the back prep area. "Talk to me," he said quietly. "There's nothing to talk about." Riley didn't look at him, her movements sharp and efficient. "I've been running on about 5 hours of sleep a night for 3 weeks because I'm trying to spend time with you and also maintain the standards of this place, and I'm failing at both. Your coffee yesterday was terrible. You know it, I know it, Derek definitely knew it. And I didn't even notice until he'd already left, because I was too busy thinking about whether you were going to be here or if you had to go handle some family business emergency. Riley. And now my supplier is screwing me, my landlord wants to raise the rent again, and I'm pretty sure my entire margin on pastries has been off for the past 2 weeks because I'm too exhausted to do proper inventory. She finally turned to face him, and he could see the exhaustion in her expression, the kind that went deeper than just missing sleep. I can't do this, Marcus. I can't be someone who half-asses running a business while she's in the infatuation phase of a relationship. That's not who I am. Okay, Marcus said carefully. So what do you need? I need to focus on my shop. That's what I need. She crossed her arms. I need to get back to the baseline I had before you showed up with your motorcycle and your complicated family situation and your gorgeous face making me forget that I have a business to run. You want me to leave, Marcus said quietly. I want you to understand that this isn't sustainable. Riley's voice cracked slightly. I like you. I really like you. But I can't sacrifice everything I've built for someone I've known for 3 weeks. I know, Marcus said. And he did know, because he'd been worried about exactly the same thing since the moment he'd decided to stay in New York. He'd been waiting for this conversation because it was the logical one, because nothing about their situation was actually simple or sustainable or sensible. So what are you saying? Riley asked. Are you angry? Are you going to tell me I'm overreacting? No. I'm saying you're right, and we need to figure out how to make this work without destroying you in the process. Marcus moved closer. But I'm not leaving, Riley. I'm not disappearing just because the first 3 weeks were easier than the next 3 weeks are going to be. How are we going to make it work? Riley demanded. You can't reduce your hours here. I can't reduce my hours running my business. We're on collision course. Then we get creative, Marcus said. He'd been thinking about this, actually. Had been turning it over in his mind for the past week, watching her get more and more exhausted, knowing that something had to change. I'm going to hire someone. Someone for what? To help you run this place, a co-manager or an assistant manager or whatever title makes sense, someone who can take on some of the operational burden so you're not drowning. He paused. I have money, Riley. More money than I know what to do with. I can invest in this business, not as an owner, as a loan or an investment or whatever term makes you comfortable, but let me help you. Absolutely not, Riley said immediately. I'm not taking money from my boyfriend to keep my business afloat. Why not? Because then you'll own a piece of me, she said harshly. Because then when things get hard, you'll have leverage. Because I know how these things go, and I'm not going to end up back at zero with my father's restaurant all over again. I'm not your ex-girlfriend who wanted you to take over her dream instead of pursuing yours, Marcus said quietly. I'm not your father, who took 2 years to support your choices. I'm just someone who loves you enough to want to help you not destroy yourself. Riley froze. The words hung in the air between them, and Marcus realized with some horror that he'd just said something he hadn't meant to say yet, something that was too big and too real, and too much for someone who'd been in his life for 3 weeks. You don't, Riley started. Don't tell me what I do or don't feel, Marcus interrupted. I know I barely know you. I know this is insane and fast and probably a terrible idea, but I'm in this, Riley. I'm in this for real. So let me help you, not because I own you or because I want something in return, but because I'm tired of watching you destroy yourself trying to be superhuman. 3 weeks, Riley said faintly. You love me after 3 weeks? I love the way you make coffee. I love the way you argue about ethics with people you've never met. I love the way you look when you're thinking hard about something. I love the way you've been trying so hard not to let me see how exhausted you are. He stepped closer, and she didn't move away. Yeah, I love you after 3 weeks. I probably loved you after 3 days. I'm just acknowledging it now. Riley's eyes were glistening, and Marcus thought for a moment that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd pushed too hard, that she was about to tell him to leave and never come back. Instead, she said, That's not fair. I know. You can't just say things like that and expect me to have a logical conversation about hiring staff. I know. I'm angry at you for making this harder than it already is. I know. She took a shaky breath and sat down heavily on one of the prep stools. If you hire someone, they have to be good. They have to actually understand what this place is about. They can't just be some random person who makes coffee. They have to care. Marcus felt something in his chest unclench slightly. Okay. And I need to vet them. I need to make sure they're not going to destroy the culture I've built here. She looked up at him. This place is my baby, Marcus, more than any relationship I've ever had. If you're going to help, you have to understand that nothing comes before this. I understand, Marcus said, and I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to let me be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And what happens in 6 months when you get bored? Riley asked. But her voice was quieter now, less defensive. What happens when you've figured out who you are and you decide you need to move on? Then we have a conversation about it, Marcus said, but I'm not going to leave because things get hard. That's not how I operate. Riley was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up and hugged him, and Marcus could feel her trembling slightly, could feel the relief in her body. Okay, she said into his shoulder. Okay, but we're doing this on my timeline and my standards, and if I don't like the person you hire, they're gone. Deal, Marcus said. Finding someone to help run the Grounded turned out to be harder than Marcus expected. Riley had specific ideas about what she wanted. Someone with coffee experience, definitely. Someone who understood that this wasn't just about making drinks, but about creating a space. Someone who cared more about quality than about profit margins. It took 2 weeks, but they found her. Alex Chen, 28, had been working as a barista at a corporate chain and was desperate to get out. She had an espresso machine tattoo on her forearm and strong opinions about single-origin beans. More importantly, when Riley described her vision for the Grounded, Alex's entire face lit up like she'd just understood the meaning of life. "This is exactly what I want to do," Alex said during the interview, which took place on a Tuesday afternoon with Riley sitting next to Marcus like a protective parent. "I'm so tired of making mediocre coffee for people who don't care. I want to make good coffee for people who actually appreciate it. You'll be taking a pay cut from the corporate job," Riley said, testing her. "The hours are long. We're constantly figuring out new logistics. It's not glamorous." "I don't want glamorous," Alex said. "I want meaningful." Riley and Marcus exchanged a look, and Marcus knew immediately that this was going to work. With Alex handling the morning rush and some of the administrative tasks, Riley's life became demonstrably less like a pressure cooker about to explode. She still worked long hours. She was Riley O'Connor, and she would always work long hours, but she wasn't falling asleep at the counter anymore. She wasn't snapping at customers. She wasn't cancelling on Marcus because she had too much to do. Instead, they fell into a rhythm that felt almost sustainable. Wednesday mornings, Marcus showed up at the Grounded at exactly 8:15 after the breakfast rush, but before the lunch crowd started trickling in. He'd bring Riley breakfast from the Dominican bakery next door, and they'd sit in the back booth with Derek's novel playing in the background, and she'd tell him about her week while he drank the coffee she'd created specifically for him. It was that coffee that became his favorite thing. Not because it was the best coffee she made, but because it was hers. She'd experimented for 2 weeks before she'd gotten it right. A blend of Ethiopian and Kenyan beans, medium roast, pulled into a double shot and combined with steamed milk that had just the right amount of foam. She'd named it the Sterling, and she said it with just enough sarcasm that he knew she was both joking and completely serious. Friday nights, they went to dinner. Nothing fancy. Riley hated fancy, said it felt false and performative. Instead, they went to little Italian places in the neighborhood, to Thai restaurants that smelled incredible, to a taco truck in Washington Square Park, where they sat on a bench and watched the city move around them. It was on one of these Friday nights, 6 weeks into their relationship, that Riley brought up the future. "I've been thinking about expanding," she said, twirling pasta around her fork. "Not right now, maybe in a year or two. But there's a space 2 blocks down that could be something. Smaller, more of a satellite location. A place where people can come and sit for hours without feeling like they need to order something every 30 minutes. "You want to open another coffee shop?" Marcus said carefully. "I want to build a business," Riley corrected. "I don't want to just run one location forever. That's not enough anymore." She paused. "Is that insane? We've been dating for 6 weeks and I'm already talking about 5-year plans." "It's not insane," Marcus said. "It's ambition. It's you wanting more. That's not a bad thing." "I know, but it means I'm going to be working even harder. And I know we just figured out this balance, and now I'm talking about disrupting it again." She set down her fork. "I just didn't want you to feel blindsided. I didn't want you to think I was making plans without you in them." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "Are you making plans with me in them?" "I don't know yet," Riley said honestly. "It's too soon to know what forever looks like. But I know I want you in my right now, and I know I want you in my this year and probably my next year. Beyond that, we're making it up as we go." "Okay," Marcus said. "That's fair. Are you okay with that? With me having ambitions that don't revolve around us?" "I love that you have ambitions," Marcus said. "I love that you're not satisfied with what you've built. It's one of the things I love most about you, that you're constantly reaching for more." Riley squeezed his hand. "I love you, by the way. I don't know if I've said it yet. It feels like I have, but maybe I haven't actually used the words." "You haven't," Marcus confirmed. "Not out loud. You said it in a cup of coffee called the Sterling, but not out loud." Riley smiled. "Well, I love you. I'm still terrified. I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I still think you're probably going to realize in 6 months that you have better options. But right now, in this moment, I love you." "That's all I need," Marcus said. "Right now, this moment." But the universe, as it turns out, does not always cooperate with the plans of people in love. Marcus got the call on a Saturday morning at 6:15. He was at the Grounded, helping Riley and Alex set up for the day, when his phone started vibrating with increasing urgency. His father, multiple times. Finally, a voicemail. Marcus's heart had sunk before he even listened to it. His father's voice, when he finally played the message, sounded older than it had in California. "Call me back immediately. It's your mother. She's had an accident. We need to talk about you coming home." Riley saw his face change and immediately moved toward him. "What happened?" "My mother," Marcus said faintly. "Something about an accident." The next 4 hours were a blur of phone calls and flights and emergency websites. His mother had been in a car accident on the Pacific Coast Highway. She was conscious, but she had multiple fractures. She was going to need surgery. She was going to need care. His father needed him in California. Riley helped him pack. She drove him to JFK. She kissed him at the security line and said all the right things about how he needed to be there, how family was important, how they would figure everything out when he got back. But Marcus could see the fear in her eyes. He could see her already building walls, already preparing for the possibility that he would get to California and realize that his real life was there, not in New York, not in a coffee shop with a woman he'd known for less than 2 months. "I'm coming back," he said, holding her face in his hands. "This is temporary." "I know," Riley said, but she didn't sound like she believed it. California felt like a different planet. Marcus's mother was recovering slower than anyone had expected. The fractures were healing, but the surgery had complications. Physical therapy was exhausting. His father, it turned out, was also dealing with early-stage hypertension that the stress of his wife's accident had worsened. The board of Sterling Technologies kept calling. There were decisions that only Marcus could make. 2 weeks passed, then 3. He called Riley every night at 9 o'clock, when the shop had closed and she was alone in her apartment above the storefront. The conversations were good but strained. There was so much happening in both their lives that there wasn't room for anything else. "How's your mom?" Riley asked on day 17. "Better. She's walking with a cane now. Another week or two and she might not need it." "That's good," Riley said, but she sounded tired. "Alex and I are thinking about doing a test run for the new location. We're looking at spaces next week." "That's great," Marcus said, and he meant it, but he also heard the unspoken message, "I'm moving forward without you." On day 21, his father sat him down in the study of the family home and said something Marcus wasn't expecting. "You need to make a choice," David Sterling said. "Not about your mother. She's going to be fine. But about your life." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're here, but you're not here. You're constantly on the phone or thinking about New York or checking your email to see if she's written." His father leaned back in his chair. "I called the board chair and told him we're hiring a permanent COO, someone else to run the California operations, someone who isn't you." Marcus's head snapped up. "You did what?" "I did what I should have done months ago. I accepted that you don't want this life." His father smiled sadly. "I know you came back because you thought you had to, because your mother needed you. But she's going to be fine, and your father can handle this company. What you can't handle is being in two places at once." "Dad!" "Go back to New York," David said quietly. "Go back to that girl and that coffee shop and figure out if that's actually what you want. But don't do it halfway. Don't do it while looking over your shoulder at what you left behind, because that's not fair to her, and it's not fair to you." Marcus left for New York the next morning. The Grounded looked different when he arrived at 7 in the morning. Or maybe Marcus was different, and it just felt that way. Alex was behind the counter, and Riley was in the back, and when she emerged and saw him, her expression cycled through surprise and hope and fear so quickly he almost missed it. "Hey," she said, like he hadn't been gone for 3 weeks. Like she hadn't stopped calling at night because the distance had gotten too heavy to carry. "Hey yourself," Marcus said. They stood there awkwardly in the middle of the coffee shop, and Marcus realized with a start that this was the hardest conversation they'd had yet, because it was the real one. It was the one that decided whether they actually had something, or whether they'd just had a beautiful moment that was already over. "I'm staying," Marcus said finally. "I'm not going back to California. My father hired someone to run the company. I'm staying in New York." "Because you have to," Riley said, "because your family situation resolved itself." "No," Marcus said, "because I want to. Because I've spent the past 3 weeks realizing that my real life is here, with you." Riley's eyes filled with tears. "You can't promise that. You can't promise that in 6 months you won't wake up and regret this choice." "You're right," Marcus said. "I can't promise that, but I can promise that if that happens, I'll tell you. I can promise that I'll be honest. And I can promise that I'm going to try every single day to be someone who's worth staying for." Riley came around the counter and kissed him, and it felt like coming home. "I love you," she said into his shoulder. "I was so scared I'd lost you." "You haven't lost me," Marcus said. "I'm here, and I'm staying." 6 months later, on a cold April morning in New York, Marcus Sterling stood in the empty storefront, 2 blocks down from the Grounded, and tried not to feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was about to happen. The space was beautiful. High ceilings, natural light, brick walls that Riley had insisted on keeping exposed. They'd spent the last 4 months designing it, arguing about layouts, figuring out logistics. Riley wanted it to be different from the Grounded. Not better, just different. A place where people could stay longer, work longer, be part of a community instead of just passing through. She was calling it the Pour. "Stop stressing," Alex said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. She'd become indispensable at the Grounded, and she was going to manage the Pour while Riley split her time between both locations. "It's going to be perfect." "What if it's not?" Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. "What if we've made a terrible mistake and this destroys everything?" "Then you'll figure it out," Alex said simply. "That's what you two do. You figure things out." Yes. The grand opening was scheduled for that evening. Riley had insisted on keeping it small. No press, no big announcement, just the neighborhood, just the people who actually cared. Friends, regular customers, suppliers who'd become friends. A community that Riley had built with her own 2 hands over the past 4 years. Marcus had contributed money. He'd helped with logistics. He'd learned how to pull an espresso shot that didn't taste like burnt regret. But this was Riley's achievement. This was her vision becoming real. He found her at the Grounded around noon, doing inventory with the focus of someone who was trying very hard not to think about the opening. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Terrified," Riley said immediately. "What if nobody comes? What if I've just invested all this money and energy into something nobody wants?" "People are going to come," Marcus said. "I've already confirmed 40 people are showing up tonight." "That's not a lot." "It's exactly enough," Marcus said. "It's people who actually care." Riley set down her clipboard and leaned against the counter. She looked tired but happy, which had become her baseline over the past 6 months. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was the exhaustion of building something, not the exhaustion of destroying herself. "I want to tell you something," Riley said. "Something I've been thinking about for a while." Marcus's heart rate immediately accelerated. Here it comes, he thought. 6 months is a long time. People realize things. People change their minds. "I was wrong," Riley continued, "about what you were. When you first showed up, I thought you were running away from something. I thought you were using me and this place as some kind of escape from your real life. And now?" Marcus asked carefully. "Now I think you were running toward something," Riley said. "Toward this. Toward us, and I think I've been waiting for you to realize that and leave. But you haven't. You're still here. You show up every day. You learn how to make coffee, even though you're terrible at it. You listen to me complain about my suppliers and my landlord and my mother's opinions about my life choices. You're just here." "I'm always going to be here," Marcus said. "Until you tell me to leave." "I don't think I'm ever going to tell you to leave," Riley said. "Even when I'm angry, even when this gets hard, I think I'm stuck with you." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Riley's eyes widened. "I wasn't planning to do this tonight," he said. "I was going to wait until after the opening, until things were calmer. But I can't wait anymore, and I'm tired of waiting, and you've spent the last 6 months waiting to see if I was going to stay, and I need you to know that I'm not just staying. I'm committing." He opened the box. The ring was simple, a single diamond on a white gold band. Nothing too ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth or privilege, just something real. "Riley O'Connor," Marcus said, "will you marry me?" Riley stared at the ring like it might bite her. "That's insane." "Completely insane," Marcus agreed. "We've known each other for less than a year. We barely know each other. I know you make coffee like it's an art form. I know you fight for what you believe in. I know you're terrified of commitment, but you do it anyway because that's who you are." Marcus stepped closer. "I know that I want to spend the rest of my life learning new things about you." "What if you get bored?" Riley whispered. "What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake?" "Then we'll have a conversation about it," Marcus said. "But I'm not going to get bored. Because you're always growing, always changing, always reaching for more. I'm not marrying a static version of you. I'm marrying the possibility of you." Riley's hands were shaking when she reached out to touch the ring. "Can I say yes and still be terrified?" "Yes," Marcus said. "You can say yes and be terrified. That's what I've been doing for the past 6 months." "Then yes," Riley said. "I'm saying yes. Even though this is insane and fast and probably doomed, it's going to work out," Marcus said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "I know it will." "How do you know that?" "Because you're worth staying for," Marcus said simply, "and I'm worth taking a chance on." The opening of the pour that evening was exactly what Riley had wanted. Intimate, real, filled with people who cared. Derek was there with his latest manuscript draft, which he dedicated to Riley for giving him a place to write. Margaret arrived early and brought homemade biscotti. James brought 3 friends who had all read his novel and wanted to support the author's favorite coffee spot. Alex worked the counter with the kind of efficiency that made Marcus realize how much Riley had taught her, how much of herself she'd poured into every person she'd trained. But the real magic happened around 9 o'clock, when the crowd had thinned and Riley stood behind the counter of her new space and pulled her first official shot of espresso as the owner of 2 locations. She made a pour-over, the Ethiopian beans, the medium roast, the exact ratio she'd perfected months ago. She poured it with the kind of intention that made everyone in the room go quiet, watching her work like it was meditation and performance and prayer all at once. When it was done, she looked up and found Marcus in the crowd. "This is for you," she said, handing him the cup. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for staying when it would have been easier to leave, for making me believe that love doesn't have to destroy everything else you've built." Marcus took the cup and kissed her, there in the middle of her new coffee shop, in front of all these people who'd become part of their story. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Riley said, "even though you're still terrible at making espresso." "I know," Marcus said, "but I'm getting better." Later, after everyone had left, after the lights were off and the coffee machines were cleaned and the day had officially ended, Riley and Marcus sat on the floor of the pour with their backs against the wall, drinking cold brew from the previous day. "I can't believe we did this," Riley said, looking around the empty space. "I can't believe this is real." "It's real," Marcus confirmed, "and it's just the beginning. In a year, you're going to want to open another location. In 5 years, you're going to have a whole chain of coffee shops across New York. You're going to be the person running a business empire instead of just one place." "Is that what you want?" Riley asked. "For me to become a business mogul?" "I want whatever makes you happy," Marcus said. "But yeah, I think you're going to be incredible. I think you're already incredible." Riley leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad you came to this coffee shop." "I'm glad I did too," Marcus said, "though I have to admit I didn't come here looking for coffee." "What did you come here looking for?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "An escape, maybe, a break from my real life. But I found something better. I found a woman who makes me want to build a real life instead of running away from one." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of New York at night. The distant sirens, the occasional car horn, the hum of the city that never actually slept. "So what happens now?" Riley asked. "We get married. We run these coffee shops. We figure out what the rest of our lives look like." "That's the plan," Marcus said, "unless you have a better one." "I don't," Riley said. "I like this plan. It's terrifying and uncertain and probably going to be harder than we think, but it's also ours." "It's ours," Marcus agreed. And in a small coffee shop in the East Village, with an engagement ring on her finger and a man beside her who'd chosen to stay, Riley O'Connor finally believed that sometimes, when you're brave enough to let someone in, love doesn't destroy everything. Sometimes it builds something new. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that scare you the most. Você adorou a jornada de Marcus e Riley? Curta, inscreva-se e conte para nós. Qual o seu momento favorito? De onde você está assistindo? Qual a sua nota para o herdeiro e a polha? De 1 a 10, o amor é complicado, o amor é real, o amor vale o risco. Nos vemos na nossa próxima.